On the 23rd of October 1944, a battle began in a small gulf in the Philippines which would determine the fate of the entire Pacific War. 15,000 men, 34 ships, and over 600 aircraft would be lost in the three-day conflict now known as the infamous Battle of Leyte Gulf. To start unravelling this mess of a battle, we first have to go into the background and planning of the whole thing. The Allied campaigns of August 1942 to early 1944 had driven Japanese forces from many of their island bases in the South and Central Pacific Ocean, while isolating many of their own bases, most notably in the Solomon Islands, the Bismarck Archipelago, the Marshall Islands, and Wake Island. And in June 1944, a series of American amphibious landings, supported by the 5th Fleet's Fast Carrier Task Force, captured most of the Mariana Islands, bypassing the island of Rota. This offensive breached Japan's strategic inner defence ring and gave the Americans a quote-unquote base for the United States Air Force's B-29 super fortresses, or Washington's if you were in the UK, could attack the Japanese home islands. The Japanese counteracted in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The US Navy destroyed 3 Japanese aircraft carriers and damaged other ships, such as destroyers, cruisers and heavy cruisers, and shot down approximately 600 Japanese aircraft, leaving the Japanese Navy with very little carrier-borne air power and few experienced pilots. I bet the chaps at the Mitsubishi aircraft factory weren't too happy about that, as, well, they would be forced to work for quite a while. Despite this, the considerable land-based air power the Japanese had amassed in the Philippines was believed to be too dangerous to bypass by many high-ranking officers outside the Joint Chiefs of Staff, including the famous Admiral Chester Nimitz. The next logical step to succeed in the coming battle was to cut Japan's supply lines to Southeast Asia, depriving them of fuel and other wartime necessities. But there were 2 different plans for doing so. Admiral Ernest J. King, other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Admiral Nimitz favoured blockading Japanese forces in the Philippines and invading Formosa, which is now known as Taiwan, while US Army General Douglas MacArthur, wanting to fulfill the 1942 promise of "I shall return," championed an invasion of the Philippines. While Formosa could also serve as a base for an invasion of mainland China, which MacArthur felt was unnecessary, it was also estimated that it would require about 12 divisions from the Army and Marines, too much to be able to spare. Meanwhile, the Australian Army, spread thin by engagements in the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and the Dutch East Indies, and various other Pacific islands, would not have been able to spare any troops for such an operation. As a result, the invasion of Formosa, or any operation requiring much larger ground forces than were available in the Pacific in late 1944, would have to be delayed until defeat of until the defeat of Nazi Germany freed the necessary manpower. A meeting between General MacArthur, Admiral Nimitz and President Roosevelt helped confirm the Philippines as a strategic target, but did not reach an overall decision, and the debate continued for 2 months. Eventually Nimitz changed his mind and agreed to MacArthur's idea. It was the Philippines. And it was eventually decided that MacArthur's forces would invade the island of Leyte in the central Philippines. Amphibious forces and close naval support, such as shore bombardment by destroyers and cruisers, would be provided by the US 7th Fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Thomas C. Kinkaid. The US Navy's 7th Fleet at the time contained units of the US Navy and the Royal Australian Navy. Before the major naval actions in Leyte Gulf had begun, HMAS Australia and the USS Honolulu were severely damaged by air attacks. During the battle, these 2 cruisers were retiring, escorted by the HMAS Warramunga for repairs at the major Allied base at Manus Island, 1,700 miles away. The US 3rd Fleet, commanded by Admiral William Halsey with the US Fast Carrier Task Force TF-38, commanded by Vice Admiral Mitcher as its main component, would provide more distant cover and support for the invasion. A fundamental defect in this plan was there would be no single American admiral in overall command. Kinkaid fell under MacArthur as Supreme Allied Commander in the Southwest Pacific, whereas Admiral Halsey's fleet reported to Nimitz as C&C, Pacific Ocean areas. This lack of unity of command, along with failures in communication, was to produce a crisis and very nearly a strategic disaster for American forces. By coincidence, the Japanese plan, using 3 separate fleets, also lacked an overall commander. Thank you for watching part 1 of an 8-part series covering the entirety of the story of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. These episodes will be released every other week because I need to weave in other content in between, and I hope you enjoy them. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I will see you next Wednesday. Cheerio!